So look, if you are just telling your registered behavior technicians what to do, walking away, and then assuming the job is just done, you aren't actually providing supervision.
Right, good call.
You are, fast-tracking staff burnout, you're actively destroying your clinic's culture, and ultimately, I mean, you are failing your clients.
It's a brutal reality to confront, but it is the absolute truth in our field. I mean, I see it constantly when I'm consulting with clinics.
Yeah.
Too many supervisors just rely on, vocal instructions alone. And then when the treatment plan inevitably falls apart, they point the finger at the staff instead of looking at the environment that they themselves constructed.
Exactly.
As clinical directors and behavior analysts, our environment is our responsibility.
So today we're really looking at the exact science of why your clinical staff are burning out and how to fix that environment you've built around them.
Yeah, this is so important.
We're doing a deep dive into the performance management science that, underpins everything you need to know for the board exams. Specifically, we're mastering BACB 6th edition task list item I.5.
Which is a beast of a topic, honestly.
It really is. And we are not just reciting textbook definitions here. We are exploring the actual mechanical, empirical reasons why procedures like modeling, practice, feedback, reinforcement, and, manipulating response effort actually work.
Right, because this is about translating behavioral theory into actionable, exam-ready logic. And, more importantly, elite clinical practice. This is where the science of behavior truly gets put to the test. Like, we preach all day about the environment controlling behavior when it comes to our clients.
Client knowing.
But the second we become managers, we throw that science right out the window. Supervision really has to be treated as a behavior analytic intervention in itself.
Yeah, 100%.
When we look at the source material, specifically the Supervisor's Guidebook, there's this heavy emphasis on avoiding what they call the cop-out attitude.
The cop-out attitude. I love that term.
Right. And frankly, eliminating this attitude is like step one for any professional who wants to be in the top 1% of clinical leaders.
So the cop-out attitude, I've seen this manifest so many times in, clinic break rooms.
Oh, yeah, every day.
We spend hours, sometimes days or weeks, doing functional behavior assessments for our clients.
Right.
We meticulously map out the antecedents, we analyze the consequences, we look at motivating operations, setting events, just to find out exactly why a client engages in a specific behavior.
Exactly. We do the work.
But with staff, we don't do any of that. We just, expect them to follow the rules because they get a paycheck. Shouldn't we be analyzing staff behavior with the exact same science we use for our clients?
We absolutely should. I mean, to answer your question directly, yes, a paycheck is not an effective behavior management tool for daily clinical tasks.
Right. It just isn't.
Yeah. Think about the mechanical reality of a paycheck. It's a highly delayed consequence.
Yeah, usually every 2 weeks.
Right. In behavioral terms, it operates on a fixed interval schedule. And we know from basic operant conditioning that fixed interval schedules produce a scalloped pattern of responding.
Yep, the old scallop.
They do not effectively shape immediate, complex, day-to-day work behavior. A paycheck reinforces the behavior of, staying employed and just showing up.
Right.
It does not reinforce the precision required to execute a complex, errorless learning protocol on a random Tuesday at 10 a.m.
Okay, but let me push back on that for a second.
Yeah.
Because I hear supervisors say all the time, look, I shouldn't have to reinforce them for doing their basic job description. If they aren't doing it, they just lack work ethic. They were just lazy.
Right.
Isn't there some validity to the idea that some people just don't want to work hard?
See, that statement right there saying they are lazy or they lack work ethic, that is the literal definition of the cop-out attitude.
Wow.
As behavior analysts, we are explicitly trained to reject those unobservable constructs, right? Those mentalisms when we're dealing with clients.
Exactly.
If a client refuses to complete a puzzle, we don't write client is lazy in the behavioral definition.
No, we'd never do that.
We say the response effort is too high, or the schedule of reinforcement is too thin, or maybe the task lacks stimulating properties.
Right.
But suddenly, when a supervisor steps into a management role, they just regress to layman's terms. They forget the science and blame this internal, unobservable trait.
So if we strip away the mentalism entirely, what is actually happening when a supervisor thinks an employee is just, let's unquote, lazy?
When you see what looks like laziness, you're really just observing a low rate of behavior.
Okay.
And as behavior analysts, we know that a low rate of behavior is a function of the environment. Performance management requires the supervisor to take full accountability for the contingencies present in the work environment. Like if an employee is not performing, it means the environment you built is failing to support that performance.
It was a tough pill to swallow for a lot of directors.
It is. But this is where we move away from guessing and into structured assessment, specifically using the performance diagnostic checklist, human services.
Ah, the PDCHS.
Yes.
I really want to spend some serious time on the PDCHS because this fundamentally shifts how we approach supervision. I mean, it basically takes the guesswork out of management.
It does. The PDCHS is an empirically validated tool designed to assess 4 specific environmental variables affecting personnel.
Okay, let's break those down mechanically.
Sure. So the first category is training. Basically, does the staff member actually know how to do the skill?
Right. Have they ever demonstrated to mastery?
Exactly. This helps us discriminate between a true skill deficit, where they literally cannot do it, and a performance deficit, where they can do it, but environmental variables are suppressing the behavior.
Which is such a crucial distinction. Because, I mean, if it's a performance deficit, sending them to another 3-hour training seminar is not just a waste of time. It's actually highly aversive to the employee.
Precisely. It's punishing. So the second category is task clarification and prompting.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning, do they know exactly what is expected of them, and are there actual environmental prompts? Like a vocal instruction you gave 3 days ago is not an effective prompt.
Right. Hey, remember to do that thing.
Right, that doesn't work. We're looking for permanent products here, written schedules, visual aids, checklists.
Makes sense.
Then the third category is resources, materials, and processes. Do they have the physical tools, the time, and the logical workflow to actually do the job?
I want to pause on that third category, resources and materials.
Yeah.
Because it sounds so obvious, right? Do they have what they need? But how often is this actually the root cause of a performance issue in a real clinical setting?
Honestly, way more often than supervisors realize.
Really?
Yeah. I recently consulted for a clinic where data collection accuracy had just plummeted, and the clinical director was fully convinced the staff were just being negligent.
A cop-out attitude again.
Exactly. So we ran the PDCHS, we looked at the resources and materials section, and it turned out the clinic was using these outdated tablets that took like 3 to 4 seconds to load the next trial screen.
Oh, wow. That's agonizing.
Right. When you're running rapid-fire discrete trials with a high-energy client, a 4-second latency on your data collection device is an eternity.
Oh, absolutely.
The technology was creating this massive physical barrier. The staff weren't lazy. They were adapting to a broken process. We upgraded the tablets, and data collection compliance jumped to 98% overnight.
That's a brilliant example of the environment controlling the behavior. So what's the fourth category on the PDCHS?
The fourth is performance consequences. Is someone actually providing reinforcing feedback for correct execution, or is the environment inadvertently punishing them for even trying? This goes right back to your point about the paycheck.
Right. The paycheck isn't enough.
Not at all. We have to look at the immediate daily consequences provided by the supervisor and the workplace culture.
Okay, so if an RBT is messing up a protocol, the evidence-based move is to run the PDCHS.
Yeah.
And you might find out they know perfectly well how to do it, but the environment is punishing them, or the response effort is just way too high.
Exactly.
And within that clinical framework, our sources highlight another critical layer that dictates how those consequences are actually perceived, which is cultural responsiveness.
Yes. This cannot be overstated. Under Ethics Code 1.07, relating to cultural responsiveness and diversity, and Code 4.08, regarding performance monitoring and feedback, supervision must be culturally responsive. It's not just a buzzword. It is an ethical and clinical mandate. It directly impacts the efficacy of your performance management.
Let's explore the mechanics of that, because the sources point out that how goals are set, how contingencies are perceived, and what functions as a reinforcer can vary vastly across cultures.
Absolutely.
This means that a stimulus that functions as positive reinforcement for one RBT might function as positive punishment for another, based entirely on their cultural learning history.
That is the exact behavioral mechanism at play here. The ethics code requires behavior analysts to actively engage in professional development to acquire skills related to cultural responsiveness.
Right.
Like, we have to evaluate our own biases.
Right.
Consider a very tangible clinical interaction, delivering corrective feedback.
Yeah.
In some Western individualistic cultures, direct eye contact during corrective feedback is totally expected. It's conditioned as a sign of engagement, honesty, respect.
But in other cultures, that same direct eye contact, especially from a subordinate to a supervisor or vice versa, has a completely different learning history.
Exactly. In many cultures, for instance, certain Asian or indigenous cultures, prolonged direct eye contact during a correction is considered highly disrespectful, or confrontational, or even deeply shaming.
Wow.
If a supervisor operates under the assumption that, like, good employees look me in the eye when I'm coaching them, they're applying their own cultural bias to that contingency.
Right. They might unfairly evaluate an RBT who is looking down out of culturally conditioned respect and just label them as disengaged or defensive.
Spot on.
Yeah.
And think about the feedback delivery itself. Let's say you have an RBT from a culture that highly values directness, efficiency, blunt communication.
Okay.
If you give them highly direct corrective feedback, they appreciate it. They adjust the behavior immediately. The feedback functions effectively as an instructional prompt.
Makes sense.
But what if you take that exact same blunt approach with an RBT from a culture that values indirect communication, nuance, and saving face?
Oh, the clinical fallout from that would be immediate.
Right.
Because for the RBT who values saving face, that blunt, public, or even semi-private correction functions as a massive punisher.
Massive. And the supervisor thinks they're just delivering a standard consequence, but suddenly the RBT's performance drops further, they start calling out sick, they actively avoid the supervisor.
Yeah, the supervisor inadvertently conditioned themselves as an aversive stimulus because they just failed to be culturally responsive.
Exactly.
That is such a critical insight. It means you just cannot apply cookie-cutter supervision. A top-tier clinical director actually discovers what functions as reinforcement and punishment for that specific individual.
Based on their unique learning history and cultural background, yes, you have to engage in bespoke behavior analysis for your staff, just like you do for your clients.
All right, let's take this theoretical framework and drop it into a very specific real-world scenario from applied behavior analysis.
Let's do it.
So let's look at manipulating response effort in a clinic or home setting. We have a mock exam scenario from the sources. We have an RBT named Sam, and Sam is consistently failing to take accurate ADC data on a client's severe property destruction.
Okay, this is a classic supervision scenario. Let's look at how the amateur supervisor handles this versus the elite clinical director. The amateur supervisor sees Sam's missing ABC data and immediately assumes a skill deficit.
Right. He doesn't know how to do it.
Yep. So they pull Sam off the floor, put him in an office, and make him watch a 45-minute PowerPoint on how to collect ABC data. Or they lean into the cop-out attitude and issue a formal reprimand.
But if we apply a function-based approach, utilizing that PDCA logic, we take a totally different path.
Entirely.
We assess the situation. We look at Sam's history and realize, wait, he knows how to take ABC data. In fact, on his previous case, his data collection was immaculate.
Right. He has demonstrated the skill to mastery under different conditions. Therefore, training is clinically contraindicated.
Exactly. Yeah. If a staff member used to perform a skill correctly, or if they demonstrate they have the skill under certain conditions, then training is not the solution. It is a performance deficit.
Correct. So in Sam's case, a thorough assessment reveals that the data collection system is overly complex for the current environment.
Yeah.
It requires him to unlock a tablet, open a specific app, navigate through 3 submenus, and then type out narrative descriptions of the antecedent and consequence.
All while physically blocking a client who is actively trying to throw chairs through a window.
Exactly. The behavioral economics here are totally skewed. The response effort required to take the data is infinitely higher than the response effort required to just manage the crisis and ignore the tablet.
So the intervention isn't to lecture Sam or retrain him. The intervention is to actually manipulate the response effort.
You have to look at the matching law. Behavior goes where reinforcement is highest and response effort is lowest. You manipulate the response effort by altering the environment. Maybe you switch from a complex digital narrative form to a simple physical paper checklist, one with pre-written checkboxes for the most common antecedents and consequences.
Oh, that's smart.
Or you install a quick capture macro right on the tablet's home screen. By radically decreasing the response effort required to take data, you reduce the friction.
Yeah.
You increase the probability of the data collection behavior occurring because you've made it easier to do the right thing than the wrong thing. This is applying behavioral science to set the RBT up for success.
Instead of trying to fix the person, you fix the environment. It's such a profound shift.
It really is.
Now let's look at a second real-world scenario, this time in a school setting, focusing on task clarification and practice. Let's say a clinical director instructs their school-based staff to run naturalistic teaching during recess.
Okay, this scenario perfectly illustrates the difference between weak supervision and elite performance management.
Okay, tell me more.
A weak supervisor just issues a vocal directive at a Monday morning meeting. Hey team, make sure you're embedding naturalistic teaching targets during recess this week. Let's get those numbers up.
I've heard that exact speech.
Right, and then they wonder why, by Friday, literally zero naturalistic teaching has occurred.
Why does that vocal directive fail so consistently, though? I mean, it seems like adults should just be able to follow verbal instructions.
It fails because of the limitations of rule-governed behavior. Rule-governed behavior following a vocal instruction works when the rule describes a contingency that is highly salient, or when rule following has a strong history of immediate reinforcement.
Which recess definitely does not provide.
Exactly. Complex motor and cognitive tasks, like contriving a learning opportunity during a chaotic recess period, require contingency-shaped behavior. The natural environment of a recess yard does not immediately reinforce the staff member for running a teaching trial. In fact, the chaotic environment often punishes it.
Right.
So the verbal rule rapidly degrades.
So just telling them what to do completely fails. What is the empirically validated protocol we must use instead to actually change their clinical behavior?
The gold standard evidence-based protocol is behavioral skills training, or BST, combined with task clarification. You do not skip these steps.
Never skip them.
First, you provide task clarification. And this is not a vocal reminder. This is a clear written activity schedule or a permanent product that explicitly states what naturalistic teaching looks like in this specific school context.
Okay, so it provides a visual antecedent.
Right. Then you initiate the BST sequence. Step 1. You vocally describe the skill and provide the clinical rationale.
And that rationale is vital for adult learners. You have to connect the behavior to the actual outcome.
Yes, but knowing the rationale doesn't build motor fluency.
No, it doesn't.
Which brings us to step 2, modeling. The supervisor cannot model this in a quiet office. They must physically go into the natural environment, the recess yard, and model the skill in real time.
Right, they have to show the staff exactly what it looks like to observe the client, identify a motivating operation, contrive the opportunity, deliver the prompt, and reinforce.
The neurology of modeling is critical here. Watching an expert perform the skill activates the learner's own motor mapping.
And then comes the step that causes, honestly, the most anxiety for staff, but is arguably the most necessary: rehearsal or practice.
Oh, yeah. Rehearsal bridges the gap between cognitive understanding and motor fluency. The staff must practice the skill while the supervisor observes.
That's where people freeze up.
They do. And this is where you have to build psychological safety. The supervisor must frame rehearsal not as a test, but as a safe space to fail and refine the motor movements before interacting with the client.
Absolutely.
And finally, step 4, feedback. The supervisor delivers immediate structured feedback, positive reinforcement for the components executed correctly, and specific corrective feedback for the missed components, immediately followed by another opportunity to practice. That entire package is what actually alters the behavioral repertoire of your staff.
I'm really glad you brought up feedback, because looking through the source material, there are some massive traps that supervisors fall into regarding monitoring and feedback.
Oh, huge traps.
And these traps don't just stall clinical progress, they actively destroy clinic culture. So let's talk about trap number 1, covert monitoring.
Okay, yes. Let's get into this.
Because here is a scenario I hear debated constantly. If staff act differently when I'm watching, like if they suffer from reactivity and suddenly start implementing the behavior plan perfectly just because I walked into the room, why can't I just monitor them covertly?
Right.
Let's use an analogy. Monitoring covertly seems like the only way to get a true baseline.
Yeah.
If I want to know the temperature of my refrigerator, I don't open the door and stand there watching the thermometer, because opening the door lets the cold air out and changes the temperature.
Okay, I see where you're going.
I want to know the temperature when the door is closed. So why can't I hide behind a two-way mirror or randomly check the clinic cameras without telling the staff so I can see what they really do when the door is closed?
The refrigerator analogy is compelling for sure, but human behavior in a social ecosystem operates on a foundation of trust, not just thermodynamics.
Fair point.
The source material and the ethics code are unequivocal on this. Covert monitoring almost always fails, and its long-term effects are highly destructive to the clinical environment.
But why does it fail? I mean, if I catch them doing something wrong on camera, isn't that just good data?
It is a Pyrrhic victory. I mean, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. You might get accurate data for that 1 hour, but you destroy the trust economy of your clinic entirely.
Right.
When you monitor covertly, it rarely stays a secret. Eventually, you have to use the data you gathered to provide feedback.
All right.
The moment you pull an RBT aside and say, hey, I noticed yesterday at 2 p.m. you didn't run the errorless learning protocol, the staff member realizes they were being watched without their knowledge.
And the immediate psychological reaction to that is profound.
It destroys trust instantly. It breeds a toxic, paranoid, we versus they culture. The staff begin to view the supervisor not as a clinical coach, but as a spy trying to catch them making a mistake.
Yeah.
It conditions the supervisor as a generalized conditioned punisher. The ethics code and the supervisor's guidebook demand that monitoring be overt. You must explicitly tell staff what you are monitoring, when you are monitoring, and why you are monitoring.
But that brings us back to the original problem, though. Reactivity. If I tell them I'm watching and I stand there with a clipboard, they're going to perform perfectly. I'm not getting real data. So how do we solve reactivity without using covert tactics?
The scientific solution to reactivity is not secrecy. The solution is habituation through overt, frequent monitoring.
Frequent monitoring.
Yes. Think about the mechanics of reactivity. Reactivity occurs because the supervisor's presence is a novel, unusual stimulus that signals a sudden and drastic change in contingencies.
Right.
If you only show up on the floor once a month with a clipboard, your presence is highly salient. You are an anomaly. Of course they react.
Because my presence suddenly signals that punishment or evaluation is available.
Precisely. But if you are on the floor constantly, if you're observing daily, providing quick supportive feedback, helping with challenging behaviors, your presence becomes a normal, non-threatening stimulus.
You saturate the environment.
Exactly. You habituate the staff to your observation. The novelty wears off, the reactivity decreases to near zero, and you get an accurate picture of their daily performance while maintaining complete transparency and trust. You become the thermostat, constantly present and blending into the background, rather than the person suddenly ripping open the refrigerator door.
That reframing is essential. The solution to reactivity is saturation, not secrecy. Let's move to trap number 2, vague or subjective feedback. I've seen this 100 times. A supervisor watches a 30-minute session, gives a thumbs up from the door, and says, "Awesome teaching today." Or, on the corrective side, they pull the RBT aside and say, "You need to be more consistent with the behavior plan."
Yeah, neither of those statements qualifies as performance management. In fact, they are clinically useless.
Wow. Useless.
Yes. Feedback must be objective, behavior-specific, and immediately actionable. Let's apply the dead man's test to feedback.
Okay, if a dead man can do it, it isn't behavior.
Right. Saying awesome teaching doesn't tell the RBT what specific motor or vocal behavior to replicate in the future. A dead man can't teach awesomely, but the phrase itself lacks any topographical description. Saying be more consistent is just as useless because consistency is a subjective abstraction.
So what does the empirically validated protocol for feedback actually sound like?
The sources outline a strict, multi-step feedback protocol. It requires you to specify the exact topography of the behavior. Instead of awesome teaching, an elite supervisor says, your latency between delivering the discriminative stimulus and providing the physical prompt was exactly 2 seconds, which perfectly matches the errorless learning protocol we designed. That exact timing is what prevented the client from making an error.
That is incredibly precise. You are isolating the exact parameter of reinforcement, the latency, so the RBT knows exactly what to do next time.
It must be that precise. And for corrective feedback, you must specify exactly what was incorrect and exactly how to fix it topographically.
Give me an example of that.
You do not say, you're doing the prompting wrong. You say, on the 3rd trial, you repeated the vocal instruction twice without increasing the prompt hierarchy. Next time, if the client doesn't respond to the first instruction within 3 seconds, immediately move to a partial physical prompt at the elbow. You provide the exact topographical change required. Feedback is an antecedent for future behavior. It must be crystal clear to be effective.
Which brings us to trap number 3. And this one is deeply tied to the psychological safety we discussed earlier. Inappropriate timing of feedback.
This is a big one.
Yeah, the sources provide a scenario involving a supervisee named Tom, who is highly sensitive to criticism and tends to become defensive. Now, basic behavioral principles tell us that consequences should be immediate to be effective.
Right.
So if Tom makes a procedural error during a session, shouldn't the BCBA step in and correct him right there, immediately, in front of the client and the client's family?
No. That is a very dangerous trap that relies on a surface-level understanding of immediacy. While the general rule is that feedback should be timely, correcting an RBT immediately in front of a client, peers, or parents can be highly aversive.
Definitely.
For someone like Tom, who has a learning history where criticism evokes defensiveness, a public correction might function as a massive punisher, not just for the specific error, but for his entire therapeutic repertoire.
Let's explore that collateral damage for a second, because the risk isn't just that Tom feels embarrassed. What is the actual clinical risk to the environment?
The clinical risk is classical conditioning. If every time Tom tries to run a complex or difficult protocol, the supervisor swoops in and publicly corrects him, the supervisor, the complex protocol, and even the client themselves can become conditioned as aversive stimuli.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Tom might start avoiding complex protocols altogether. He might stick to easy maintenance tasks just to avoid the risk of public correction. You are unintentionally punishing his therapeutic ambition.
So how do we balance the need for immediate feedback with the need to protect the staff member's dignity and avoid conditioning the clinic as an aversive environment?
The expert balance is timing versus setting. The evidence-based approach is to address sensitive issues privately. If it's a minor mechanical error, like adjusting the angle of a physical prompt, a quick, quiet, supportive correction in the moment might be fine. But if it is a larger procedural error, you wait for a natural break, or you ask the RBT to step into the hallway for a moment.
Right.
Private correction is clinically and ethically superior because it preserves the supervisor-supervisee relationship, it protects the staff's dignity, and it ensures the feedback functions as an instructional prompt to improve behavior, rather than a punisher that suppresses behavior.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of clinical application, cultural responsiveness, and the behavior mechanics of common traps.
We really have.
Now, I want to pivot specifically for the listeners who are prepping for the board exam. We need to talk about Pearson VUE logic.
Yes, let's do it.
Because the exam tests your ability to apply these concepts under pressure. So let's play. If you see this, choose this.
This is critical for translating advanced clinical knowledge into passing scores. The exam requires you to identify the most correct answer based on very specific phrasing, and the test writers are experts at creating highly plausible distractors.
Yeah, they are. Okay, exam logic 1. Let's say a scenario describes an employee who used to perform a skill correctly.
Okay.
Maybe they used to graph data perfectly every Friday, but over the last month, they've just stopped. Or maybe they're avoiding a complex task they previously mastered. What is the logic here?
If the prompt clearly establishes that the employee has previously demonstrated the skill to mastery, do not choose behavioral skills training, retrain, or provide a vocal prompt.
Right.
The exam is testing whether you can discriminate between a skill deficit and a performance deficit.
So if the skill is already in their repertoire, retraining is a waste of time and a clinically incorrect answer. So what do you actually choose?
You choose the answers that address the environment. Choose. Manipulate response effort, assess environmental variables, or administer the performance diagnostic checklist human services.
Yeah.
If they used to do it, it is a performance deficit. The environment is failing to support the behavior, so you must manipulate the contingencies or the response effort.
Spot on. Okay, exam logic 2. The question asks for the best tool to evaluate if an RBT is implementing a complex behavior intervention plan exactly as prescribed by the BCBA. I see so many distractor terms used for this concept.
Oh, yes. The distractors are designed to sound intensely clinical. You might see options like assessment fidelity checks, skills assessment, or competency evaluation.
Do not fall for them.
Do not. If the question is explicitly about evaluating the step-by-step adherence to a prescribed treatment protocol, the correct board-approved term is treatment integrity check, or procedural integrity. A skills assessment evaluates general competency across broad areas, but a treatment integrity check is a highly specific measurement of whether the independent variable the treatment is being applied exactly as written.
Perfect clarity on that. All right, exam logic 3. This trips up a lot of people. You see a scenario where a supervisor implements a contingency to boost productivity. The rule is that everyone in a group, say, all 5 RBTs on a team, must meet a specific standard in order for anyone in the group to get a bonus.
Right. That is the classic all or none rule. If you see all or none for a group reward, you must choose interdependent group contingency.
Let me pause you there and push back, because this brings up an ethical question that I think confuses test takers.
Okay, go ahead.
If I tie everyone's bonus to the lowest performer in an interdependent group contingency, aren't I just breeding resentment? Won't the high performers just like bully or coerce the low performer into compliance rather than actually supporting them? How is that empirically validated?
That is a fantastic clinical question, and it really highlights why you must understand the mechanics of these contingencies. You are describing the risk of negative social side effects.
Right.
However, when implemented correctly, an interdependent group contingency actually fosters peer-to-peer coaching and cooperation because the high performers have a vested interest in helping the struggling staff members succeed.
Ah, I see.
To answer exam questions accurately, you must distinguish it from the others. Do not confuse it with an independent group contingency where everyone is graded on their own individual performance regardless of the group.
Right.
And do not confuse it with a dependent group contingency, also known as the hero procedure, where the whole group's reward depends on the performance of one specific individual. If the prompt says all must meet the criteria for all to get the reward, it is interdependent.
That Pearson VUE logic is pure gold. We've covered the exam strategy. Now, I want to elevate this conversation even further. I want to move from just passing the exam to operating in the top 1% of clinical leadership. Let's talk about the clinical power insight derived from our sources. The Task Enjoyment Motivation Protocol, or TEMP.
Yes. The TEMP process is the embodiment of advanced organizational behavior management. It is what separates an average supervisor from an elite leader.
How so?
Average supervisors just aim for compliance. They use threats, write-ups, or delayed paychecks, and they just want the data sheets filled out.
Yeah.
Elite BCBAs understand that compliance is the bare minimum. They aim for staff retention, high work enjoyment, and building a resilient, self-sustaining culture.
Because the ultimate insight of TEMP is that elite clinical directors treat staff motivation as a dependent variable, not an innate personality trait.
Exactly.
If your staff hate their jobs, they are going to leave, and your clients will suffer from the clinical regression caused by constant turnover. So how does the Task Enjoyment Motivation Protocol actually work mechanically?
Let's say there's a task that is universally disliked by the staff, for example. A massive, highly detailed end-of-month graphing report that takes hours.
Ugh, the worst.
The amateur supervisor mandates it, complains about the staff's bad attitude, and threatens disciplinary action.
Right.
The elite supervisor implements TEMP, step 1. They meet with the staff to solicit objective opinions on why the task is aversive. They gather data on the specific aversive properties of the task.
So they're basically conducting a preference assessment, but in reverse. They're assessing for task aversiveness.
Exactly. They are identifying the variables that make the task punishing. Step 2. They collaboratively discuss reasonable structural changes.
Okay.
Step 3. They actively restructure the task to decrease those aversive properties while strictly maintaining clinical integrity.
So what would that look like for the graphing report?
Maybe they break the massive monthly graphing report down into smaller 10-minute weekly chunks to reduce the cognitive load.
Oh, that makes it way more manageable.
Yeah, right. Maybe they pair it with a preferred activity, like a catered team lunch. Or they analyze the workflow and eliminate redundant data entry that was causing unnecessary friction.
What's really fascinating about TEMP is that it represents true participative management.
Yeah.
You aren't just dictating rules from the top down and expecting rule-governed behavior to carry the clinic.
No, not at all.
You are bringing the staff into the problem-solving process.
Yeah.
You're giving them agency over their environment.
And that agency is a powerful reinforcer. When staff feel heard and valued, when they see their supervisor actively working to manipulate the environment to make their daily work life better and less aversive, their overall motivation, clinical precision, and loyalty skyrocket.
Absolutely.
You are conditioning yourself and the clinic as a highly reinforcing environment. That is the true power of empirically validated performance management. It isn't just about getting people to do what you want. It is about building an environment where people want to execute at the highest level.
We have covered an incredible depth of material today in this deep dive. We started by dismantling the cop-out attitude and replacing it with the empirical rigor of the PDCHS.
Yes.
We explored the deep behavioral economics of manipulating response effort. We broke down the exact neurological and behavioral reasons why behavioral skills training succeeds where verbal instructions fail. We unpacked the dangers of covert monitoring and the necessity of precise, perfectly timed feedback, and we capped it off with the advanced OBM strategies of the Task Enjoyment Motivation Protocol.
It all comes back to a single, unifying principle. We must treat supervision as a science. We cannot abandon the principles of behavior analysis the moment we step off the clinic floor and start managing adults. The environment controls the behavior of the RBT just as powerfully as it controls the behavior of the client.
So well said. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to evaluate your own practice.
Go for it.
Look closely at your own caseload and your own clinical staff right now. If your staff's performance was plotted on a standard acceleration chart today, what would the data actually say about your behavior?
That's a great question.
Would the data show that you are actively managing their performance with science, adjusting the environment, manipulating response effort, and providing precise reinforcement? Or would the data reveal that you are just relying on hope, a delayed paycheck, and the cop-out attitude to keep them compliant?
Yeah, let that sink in.
If this helped you follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. www.amethysttherapyservices.com, info@amethysttherapyservices.com.